So we live in a time, whānau, where we have the most technologically advanced ability to connect with people, yet we are more isolated and disconnected than any time in history. It makes no sense. Our need for connection runs so deep because it's by God's design. We were born for connection. Connection with Him, first and foremost, and connection with others. Yet the need for instant gratification and immediate results has led to a culture of impatience and intolerance for slower, personal, real-life communication. As a result, we become more isolated and disconnected from others, opting for a quick, superficial interactions over more deep and meaningful connections, which come with all of their annoyances and hassles and inconvenience at times. It's much easier to deal with an online virtual connection sometimes than it is with the real life, in-person, and sometimes uncomfortable connections that we have as human beings. But it's all good. Facebook. I call it fake book. Now, obviously, real people, but a virtual view of lives. You know, a lot of Facebook posts are dribble, and there are a lot of Facebook posts that are the highlights reel. And you can easily look at someone else's Facebook and go, oh man, you know, this life, their life, oh, you know, they just got this or that, and, you know, they've got photos that they're posting, and you feel dumb about your life. It's not real. Facebook isn't real. Build real connections. I use Messenger to help connect with family overseas. I think it's fantastic. But your internet connection with people can never satisfy your need for real connectedness. Social media helps you feel connected while isolating you from in-person relationships. Like an alcoholic who reaches for the bottle to feel better, and does for a time, and then is left lower than when they started. I've recently deleted Facebook off my phone because it was a distraction from all the personal relationships around me. I was getting distracted. I thought, I just can't keep doing this. You know, I'd get home from work, I'm tired, I just some downtime. What would I do? I'd pick up my phone, I'd open it, I'm scrolling there, and my son's sitting at my feet. Dad, put that down. Dad, will you play with my toys? Put it away. So I found it easier to just delete the whole thing. My message today is all about connection and connectedness, and I'll be open and honest about my journey and my views in the hope that I might influence the culture here at House of Breakthrough and strengthen the value of connectedness. We have a notice board down there at the back, and one of the things on that notice board, I think there's a couple of pages there, about our strategic plan goals for 2023. You may not have read it, you may read it after this. So, one of our main goals for 2023 is to build the house, to build community. It goes on, each goal has 2 objectives, and we choose 2 for a year that we work on. And one of the objectives for that goal is that people in the congregation have opportunities to develop connection with each other. We've listed a few different things. There's a new beginning class, there's life groups, there's just general caregiving and community. And the second objective there is that we create a culture of hospitality. Our selecting of strategic goals and objectives is about strengthening our foundations here. As a leadership team, we recognized that the area of building community in our church needed strengthening. Now, as pastors and leaders, we can create opportunities for connection, but it doesn't guarantee connection. The truth is, we can shape an environment for connection, but unless we all play our part, the culture of connection doesn't take hold, it doesn't develop. It's like the Velcro. Both sides need to be engaging for the Velcro connection to work. See, I could put the Velcro on my nice smooth skin. There's no active connecting happening on my face, and nothing happens. It needs two sides to actively be engaging in connection. For it to work. That's my flash props for today. So I want to just share a short note to my first few months, even maybe first few years here at House of Breakthrough Church. Man, it was hard for me to connect. Apart from my amazing neighbours, the Rickard whānau, actually I'll tell you a little story about how I connected with the Rickard whānau. I'd been given a bow and arrow, and not just any old bow and arrow. This was a hunting bow and arrow, and so I wanted to show one of my family members who I was living with how powerful it was. So I decided I couldn't really shoot it in town. It's the kind of bow and arrow that would go, if you lined up a car, it would go through 2 or 3 cars. So I thought, right, I'll climb up on a chair and I'll shoot it down into the ground just to show him. But anyway, the unthinkable happened. It went into the ground, it turned around under the ground and bent, and then it jumped up, and then it took off across the lawn, went through the hedge into the neighbour's house somewhere. And my uncle who I was talking with was like, oh no, they've got lots of kids over there. I was like, and he goes, what are we going to do? He says, quick, go next door and look for the Teletubby. I'm like, my uncle had an inappropriate sense of humour, Stephen Goldsmith. Anyway, so I sheepishly went next door to meet the neighbours. Actually, I went to retrieve my arrow quietly, but I ran into the neighbours and had to have a conversation. And I downplayed it. They're not here today. They're at a tangi up the coast. So I downplayed it and said, just my little bow and arrow thing. I just come in to get my arrow. It just went under the fence. They've never actually seen the bow and arrow and may not be happy. So whatever you do, just don't fire something like that in town. So I had gone next door and then began to form a connection, and we were invited over there for dinner, and so that connection began to build. But all that aside, I'll go back to my notes so that we actually get to have lunch afterwards at some point today. So apart from my neighbours, the Rickard whānau, and Pastor Norman Jess, it was actually about 2 years of coming before I built any significant connections. And at one point, you know what, I thought, man, everybody here is so unfriendly. But here's the real story. I wasn't in a great shape to develop connections myself. In fact, I was in a terrible space to do that. I had to be real with myself, and when I did, I figured out that I didn't actually want to work at building any connections. I was anxious, I was depressed, and realistically, I didn't have much capacity to build any connections at the time. I used to deliberately arrive 5 minutes after the service started, so I didn't have to deal with any people. And then as soon as the altar call would happen, bow your heads and close your eyes, I was out of there. That was my space. No one saw me run out the back because everyone's had their eyes closed and head bowed. But I was still left after 2 years thinking, man, these people are so unfriendly. It takes capacity and willingness and working at it to build connection. And the acceptance that sometimes our best efforts will fall flat and fail. It takes sticking in for the long game, just like our walk with God. No flash in the pan, I tried it for a month and it didn't work, short game. But the long game, like the Bible talks about, you will reap if you do not lose heart. It talks about keeping sowing, staying in it. You see, the culture of connectedness, or whakawhanaungatanga, it's not a simple task. I'm going to prove to you that it's not a simple task. I've been married to Julia for near 18 years, and we are still working at connectedness. We don't share the same brain, or the same, Julia's going, thank God for that, or the same personality type. It's work, whānau. Incredibly fulfilling, totally amazing, and so worth putting in the effort for work. All meaningful connections take effort and work. It doesn't take hardly any effort to build a virtual connection. But to build a real connection, it's going to take effort. When Julia and I first got married, Julia would ignore me all the time. Can you believe that? She would just ignore me all the time. Anything I said to her, she would ignore me. And Julia's perspective is that I would talk so much, I would never let her get a word in. How did this happen? Well, you see, I'm more on the extrovert side, and Julia's more on the introvert side. So extroverts and introverts, if you haven't realized, have different awareness of silence and tolerance to silence or acceptance of silence and the gap in which somebody can say something. I grew up with 2 extrovert siblings, and Julia thinks we talk over the top of each other all the time. I'm like, no, there was a gap. You know, it's like Auckland drivers. I could fit in there. You know, like, honestly, they've got to breathe. You can get a word in. I don't understand anybody who says I couldn't get a word in edgeways. I'm like, well, they had to breathe. And so I'd ask Julia a question, and she wouldn't answer it. I was like, she's ignoring me. This is so painful. And I would get ho-ha. I'd get a bad attitude. A while into it, I just found out she was just thinking. Like, some people actually think before they answer. I'm learning to do some of that. But Julia would ask me a question, and whatever's on the top of my head, that's what came out. Sometimes that gets me into trouble. Tamaya, be quiet. No stories. And at the same time, you know, I would be leaving what I thought for my family of origin a great space for her to respond in a conversation. But, I mean, it's like in prayer meeting. Might as well be real. It's like if you're in a prayer meeting with a lot of extrovert people, and I'm thinking, man, what's wrong with these other people? They're not even praying. And I'm sure the other people are thinking, what's wrong with these people? They don't shut up and let anyone else have a go. And so I've had to learn to increase my space of being okay and being comfortable with silence. And it's a hard job for me, whānau. It is hard. And so when I'm in a prayer meeting and I'm feeling, we've got a sense of the gap. Someone will pray, there's a bit of a gap, and we're sitting there and I'm like, I got to jump in. And I just like, no, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to say nothing. And then all these other people start praying and bringing out some amazing things that they're well considered and thought through. And the prayer meeting is such a good space because I've learned a little bit, living with Julia, that I need to give some space for others. Any extroverts out there? Find this funny? Any introverts? All right. It's the same with our kids. Some of our kids we connect with easily, especially the cheeky ones. And in my family, humor is a way that I use to connect. And when I try it with the kids, I get mixed results. Dad, you're so funny. You're the greatest. I love you. We so get each other. And then you get another result that might be, oh, Dad, get some better jokes. But still, I'll give you a 3 out of 10 for trying, and I really do appreciate you. Other times you get, hey, stop it. You're being stupid and making me uncomfortable. Go away until you're not going to be silly anymore. I'm not amused. Sorry, love. So, whānau, it takes time and commitment and grace, and it's always a two-way street, just like the Velcro. I'm going to put a few comments in here about a special friendship that I built in the house. That was Cal and I. Cal being Kelly McLeod, Norman Jess's son Kelly. He and I were extremely different personalities. We had loads of misconnects in the early years, offences, misunderstandings, and even clashes at times. But we stuck at it, and we got there, and we built a fantastic connection, and I miss him dearly. I must be honest and say it was about 2 years after I first started coming to House of Breakthrough before Cal and I even spoke one word to each other. And that was somewhat of an accident. He was always on the sound desk and quite busy in services. I would turn up late and leave early, so it didn't leave a lot of space to connect with people. And one day I needed to go to the toilet, and I had to go down the row, and he'd got up from the sound desk, and he'd had to come back this way, and we sort of got there, and we really couldn't stop avoiding any eye contact, and so we looked up, And I said, hey. And he said, hey. And then we carried on. And after that, we began actually building a connection. It was that initial start that it took us a couple of years to get there. And at church, it takes us all to make connection work in a community setting. I find that initial connection space quite easy, unless I'm communicating with somebody who finds that initial connection space very difficult. And then I get all awkward. I don't know what to say or what not to say. I don't know when to stop talking. I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know where to put my hands. Sorry, I lost my notes there for a second. I just fumble my way into a mess, probably leaving the poor introvert thinking that I'm some sort of weird guy who needs to read a load of self-help books on how to connect with people. Or perhaps that I didn't take my meds this morning. And hey, whānau, if you're on meds, you're in good company. When I arrived 23 years ago, anxious and depressed, I was on medication. I did have to remember my medication before I came to church in the mornings. But it's all good. The meds were helpful for me at that time. Sometimes we just misconnect, even when we're trying really hard to build connection. You see, try as I might in the early days of Revolution Youth, there was some youth that I just plain annoyed every time I tried to make a connection. I couldn't believe it. I was like, man, I thought I was good at this, and I'm terrible. Enter Peter Clark. He made it look effortless. You see, we're a team, and building a culture of connectedness is a team effort. It only truly fully works when we all obey God and all work at it. You see, we each have different strengths, different people that we're going to naturally connect with easier than others. You know, and every single person will fill in a blank left by somebody else. And if we all do this together, we actually shift the culture. Even a perfect communicator only has so many connections they can maintain. And so all of us, every single one of us, have a part to play. And I've noticed over the years that two people who find making initial connection difficult are often better at building connections than when I'm trying to build a connection with somebody in that space. They get each other better. Where I said earlier, you know, I just make things awkward. You know, they understand what it's like to be in that space, and so they're more in tune. I'm not in tune to that space. And with connections, there are expectations. And we all have different expectations. And that's what makes the whole thing more complex. You know, some of us are in a space where we might have a huge circle of connected people outside of church. And so we might take a little longer to build connections because the necessity isn't there. Someone who's just come from out of town, there's a greater need to build connections. And so we're all different. And we all build connections on different levels. Just like in a family, you know, you get the connections between a mum and a dad, son, grandpa, auntie, random cousin, thrice removed. And if he keeps being an egg, it'll be 4 times removed and he'll never be allowed back. Everyone's got that cousin. Just don't be that cousin. I've got a little note here about setting boundaries. And, you know, some of us find setting boundaries easier and some of them harder. We do need to set boundaries when we are building connections. Setting boundaries helps connections happen. So I'd just like to say in terms of a boundary, whānau, don't ring me on a Monday. It's my day off, unless you are willing to take me hunting, if you're ringing for that. No maha mai, ring me up, I'm going. Boundary setting is not rejecting. And that's sometimes something that we can struggle with. If somebody sets a boundary, they're unfriendly. But sometimes that person's trying to set a boundary so that they can be friendly on their terms. Because everybody builds a relationship on their terms, or they back out, disappear, and you won't get one. It's just the reality of how us humans work. Boundary setting builds a structure which can sustain connection. In Proverbs 25:17, it says, "Let your foot really be in your neighbor's house, or he will become weary of you." So, you know, there are sensible and logical boundaries, and there is no one set answer for there. The only way you can find those out is get to know somebody. Talk about it. Find out what their boundaries are. And if you are a person who struggles to set boundaries, or one who struggles to respect other people's boundaries, it's likely that meaningful connection will elude you until you work through that. I'm just going to put a few practical considerations out. Things to think about when you're building connection with people. Think about the ages of your guests. Think about the age of the children if they have children, their job requirements. Don't stay till 9:30, 10 o'clock on a weeknight when the family has young children, and they're having meltdowns and they're overtired and you're just like enjoying the vibe and connecting, Like just, be sensible, be wise to it. Just, leave early and think, oh man, I wish I could connect more. That's a great space to leave a connection in. And if you're in the middle of renovations, perhaps somebody else's house is a better place to meet. Team up. It's a great way of building connections in the house and taking pressure out of the equation. Talk to another family. Maybe you can sort the roast out, and friends of yours can bring the dessert, and the host can set an environment and set the table. We need to work together often. Julia and I have we have quite a few people through our home, and often we may not have done that for a little while, and we're like, oh man. And so what we try and do is get groups of people together, and we think about it. We think, let's invite some people from, that we know really well, some people that are good connectors. So sometimes, we might be in the kitchen the whole time, and then I know particularly for Julia, if she's in the kitchen, she feels terrible because she's not giving our guests 100% of her undivided attention. And so when there are more people in the mix, it's actually easier to do. And everyone can bring some food. Right. Connecting is complex. It's not easy when it's hard, and it's simple when it is. But at the end of the day, God gave us instructions. He didn't say do the easy stuff, and he didn't even say do the hard stuff. What he did say is do not neglect hospitality. In Romans 12, it highlights the social and community aspects of salvation. Paul was not writing to an individual, but to the community of Christians in Rome, and his consistent concern was their life together and their ability to build community. Behind me, you will see Romans 12. I've written the whole lot out here, so I'm starting at verse 9. It says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves, never lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Our response should be to action that word, that directive, rather than leave it to others who are good at it. I know it's all of our responsibility. It even gets a little heavier in Matthew 25:34. I'm just going to read a few verses from there. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, all you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you visited me. The righteous man will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it for me. I found it a little interesting when I was putting this word together, because I've read that a whole lot of times, and I've never really picked out that I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. I sort of glossed over that part and, thought about the prison ministry aspect of it, and thought about giving food for people, and thought about these other areas, and I'm like, actually hospitality is a big part of that. I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. It gets a whole lot heavier, which I'm not going to read. You can read that for yourselves this morning, further down in Matthew 25. But it talks about Depart from me, I didn't know you because you didn't do this kind of stuff. But what would Jesus do? He would welcome a stranger. Do it. A little note there, Julia and I, when we're out of town, we'll go to churches on a Sunday, and they'll have a space similar to a whānau time. Most of them don't call it whānau time, it just might be connect time, whatever it is. But we don't wait for anybody to come and connect with us. We just think, oh, it's connect time. So, we're out there, an introvert and an extrovert, but we're both finding people to connect with. We don't sit there and go, well, I'm new here, so I'm just going to wait it out, because as much as it might be a pain, sometimes we do that, and we can spend 2 hours in a service and not be spoken to once. Because people already have connections, there's already maintenance of those connections going on, there's a lot of things that we don't always know that are going on in that space to connect. So, what we do is we just get up and we go and we greet people like we own the place. It's kind of funny sometimes. Oh, hey, how are you? How long have you been coming? And the person sort of looks at you awkwardly. About 10 years. Yeah, what do you do here? I'm the senior pastor. Oh, kia ora, nice to meet you. I can do that because this is my Father's house. And wherever I go around the nation, it's my Father's house. It's your Father's house. Feel at home in your Father's house. It will help. If you have that mindset, it'll help break down some of those initial barriers that might make it difficult to connect. All right. Now, it is great if you have meals in your house with others, but it's not always practical or even possible with some of our living situations. So I would say be creative. When our big kids were younger, we would meet people at the beach and have a barbecue. Plenty of space to play. We were also doing renovations at that time as well, so there was plenty of space to play, and if they messed up the sand, who cares? Just pick up your rubbish at the end, throw the paper plates in the bin, and drive home and put them into bed. And if it wasn't too late, we might even wash the sauce off your face, Tamaya. Meet in the cafe at the back. There's a park just across there. Meet people in a park. Stay behind after church and connect. Get a beautiful lawn out there. Isn't Moana doing a fantastic job of our lawns at the moment, whānau? Yes, if you haven't noticed, we changed lawnmower companies a while back, and the place has never looked so good. So bring a picnic blanket, connect with somebody, have a picnic out there afterwards. Our family, we'll often do something on a Sunday, Sunday after church, and that's sometimes a struggle with me because I'm thinking, particularly if I've been in an active ministry role, I'm like, oh, I've done that, I've put in the hard yards, wouldn't it be nice to go home and have a nana nap? And I'm like, after all, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, it's a day of rest. And then I start unpacking those scriptures and I'm like, okay, so we're supposed to be doing the Lord's will, rest from your will, do the Lord's will on a Sunday. I'm like, maybe it's not as clear cut as I thought it was. And I'm not trying to mess with anyone's doctrine. I'm just trying to say, for us, it's like, I'm going to rest from my stuff and my agendas, and I'm going to say, God, what's on your heart and your agenda for today? So we will often, Sundays often is a hosting day for us with other families. A few years ago, my health took a dive, and so did my energy levels and my capacity for people. I wasn't in a good space. I didn't have many people over home for about 18 months. It kind of looked like I didn't eat for 18 months. I lost 17 kilos. I've found 19 of them. And so if you're missing 2, I think I've got them. You can have them back. But for that time, my health wasn't well at all. My energy levels, it was exhausting. I was having heart fluctuations and all sorts of things. I lost my ability to concentrate, so holding and having conversations and tracking with people was very difficult. I had elevated anxiety over that time. Man, it was a tough season. You see, we all have seasons, and yet we still have responsibilities, and sometimes we've got to manage those together. And I'm so glad in that season, when I felt I couldn't deal with anybody for a meal, we still stretched out beyond where I felt my capacity was for one family over that 18-month time. and that was Kelly and Bronnie and the kids. We had them over a few times in that season. They were probably the only ones that we had during that season. Little did I know, in a short while, that Kelly would be gone from this life. Precious times that I thought I couldn't afford to do. I really couldn't afford not to. So hospitality looks different in different seasons, and that's okay. Giving and receiving hospitality are both important. Some need to learn to receive hospitality. If you're invited out, if it's within your control, take people up on the offer. Not on a date, Ethan. I can say that because Ethan's not here this morning. I'm not talking about that space. Feel free to tell them no, no thanks, double no, heck no, and triple no. And come and see one of us pastors if you're being pestered by anybody who is not respecting your boundaries in that space. That's not on. But what I'm talking about is healthy community connections. Do what Jesus would do. And I heard this said by a pastor friend of mine from Tauranga the other day. Jesus was either at a meal, leaving a meal, or going to a meal through much of Scripture. That's a fantastic Scripture. And speaking of going to a meal, I have a poem for you that I found on the internet the other day. I thought it was fantastic. So did Tamaya. This is the poem. Roses are red. Bacon is red. Poems are hard. Bacon. That's my new favoriteest poem. Totally. Speaking of bacon, we have a men's breakfast on Sunday the 24th at 6:30 a.m. Actually, we've changed it to the youth room. And that is $5 to register, so you can put your name in order to tag your registration place. Pay $5 at the Just Ask Me desk, and that is just for the bacon. Everything else we will provide. And, we need to be realistic. Men's breakfast will not necessarily build community beyond anything that we already have. But it creates an opportunity for us to build community. It's a great environment, but it's still up to us to step out. We've got to make sure that we're engaging in connection. So let's be, I have a dream where men in our church community and our wider community live lives in connection, not isolated, not going through things alone. And I know what it's like to be in a church and feel isolated. And I've also learned that there are a bunch of things that I needed to shift in order to step out of that isolation. I needed to commit to the long game. Don't dwell on the setbacks. Don't blame others. Don't put all the responsibility on somebody else when we're feeling like we're not making connections well. Proverbs 18:24 says, for a man to have friends, the Bible says he first must be friendly. I had to look at that scripture and think, man, it's like I don't understand why when I turn up in church with my dark sunglasses on and my arms folded and my scowl on my face and looking down like this, why nobody bounces up to me and says, hey, how you doing? Because I'm setting a force field and an atmosphere that says, rack off, I don't like people. And, the reality is I wasn't trying to do that. I wasn't feeling good. I was feeling like that. What I actually wanted was people to connect, and I had to figure all out how to shift that stuff to actually get those needs of connection met. I was a pretty broken and unfriendly person when I arrived. But I just want to thank you to all the guys who persevered with me and even kept persevering later on when I got my feet and then I became super task focused and orientated on the stuff that needed doing rather than the connections that needed being. So aroha mai guys, thanks for persevering with me in that space too. And I'm nearly ready to close, but I just wanted to touch on a couple more things before I do. Digital connections are way more convenient, but they're actually distractions from true connections. The distractions can be TV, it's a massive distraction. Internet, gaming, oh man. The amount of fathers who one day are going to wake up and their son has gone and left home and they're going to be thinking, man, why did I spend so many hours, so many late nights, and then wake up in the morning or 11:30 in the morning trashed, missed my son's game, wasn't in a space to connect because I was gaming all the time. Smartphones, they're dumb when it comes to connecting. How many of us would trade every phone session of endless scrolling through dribbling mindless media for real connections when our loved ones are gone? Practice building a culture of hospitality in your own home, with your kids, with your spouse, with your mum, with your auntie, with your flatmates. And when that is strong, you'll have something to export. Turn the TV off and the phones off at meals. Have 0 device time during meals. Now, I like this in concept, but I have found it very difficult in my family to do that. I agree to it, and then I sit down and my phone goes ding, and I just get up, or I put it on silent and have it in my pocket, and then, somebody's asking me a question and I'm just checking Trade Me. Totally. Somebody has offered me 7mm 175 ELDX bullets for the price of $90. I'm not kidding you. That's just come up on my Trade Me. It's on silent. So doing that, and then I'm like, and then my son is like, Dad, I'm like, what? He goes, what's the answer? And I'm like, I think I should buy it. No, wrong answer. I think I should take my phone and throw it away. And so I've started doing that again. I'm like, I'm not even leaving it in my pocket. I'm not leaving it on silent mode. I will turn it on silent and I will throw it. And I normally on the couch where it's nice and soft and I'm looking after it. But I get rid of it. I get away from that space because I know I'm not good with that. My son, he gets really wound up when I'm in that space. So I've got to learn that I need to change. So I have been changing. I am changing. I'm continually going to be changing. And, I'm preaching this and my family are in the front row and they're going to hold me to it. Dad, what are you doing with your phone at the table? Deviceless meals. Time around the meal table is priceless. Eat, talk, even with your mouth full if you have to. Got to tell you some funny things. Sometimes we can get really caught up on, we can get really caught up. You probably don't. You're probably way more chilled. We could get really caught up on having to say grace before the meal. And sometimes, you're hungry, the kids sit down. They're only 5. They're like, and one other kids would be like, we haven't said grace yet. Put that down. I'm like, no, hang on. Let's change it up. Right, everyone get a mouthful. We're going to do grace with our mouthful today. And I'm not trying to be sacrilegious, but I want my kids to enjoy blessing God for their food. Not thinking he's sitting there with a big stick, and if you haven't said grace, you're some sort of naughty kid. It's like, I was just super hungry. I tried to go to Jean Bewley's house. She used to throw salad when you were there as guests. Some of you know Queen Jean. All right, so make mealtimes fun. Include God in that space. He's fun. He's great. He's loving. He's connecting. Let's not be so religious around those things. Let's actually not be religious at all. It doesn't work. It doesn't help our kids. Tell stories during meals and after meals, of God's breakthrough and provision. And, we'll often do that. We'll get to the end of the meal and I might start with just saying, what was your favorite thing about today? Go around the corner. What's a time that you remember that God answered one of your prayers? And we go around the table and we do that. And we bring to remembrance those things, because what we are doing is connecting our kids with God, the greatest connection they could ever have. And you won't do that if you're connected to your device. And worse still, if you eat in front of TV, you won't build those connections and you won't do that. Your connections will only suffer if you have TV dinners. So whānau, if that's you, I have a word for you for the sake of the next generation and your connection to them and their connection for God. Quit TV dinners and sit at the table. If you don't have a table, sit at the couch, sit on the deck and have family conversations around a model. Around a dinner. You are modeling connection to them with God. I'm pretty much done. I've always got lots more to say. So it's going to have to be series 2, 3, and 4. In summing up this morning, our efforts to build connection and community won't work unless we each take up the opportunities in front of us, together with seeking to create opportunities around us for ourselves and for others. Be in it for the long game, whānau. I love how it reads in Romans 12. It says, practice hospitality. So you don't have to be good at it. God never said that in his word when he inspired Paul in Romans 12. He just said practice. So practice. Step out. Go out of your comfort zone. As I found in my first few years, just being at church on a Sunday is not enough to build meaningful connections. Join a life group. We've got a notice board at the back that tells you what life groups are available. And if there's not a life group in your area or your space, come and talk about it and let's start another one. I joined a life group early on at House of Breakthrough, and I'm still connected to some of those guys from that group 20 years later. Our Christian journey is designed to be lived and walked out in the context of community. You may well respond to an altar call when you are dealing with a certain issue in your life, and you should come forward for prayer. This is good, but it also takes community and support to work out parts of our journey. Some of the things you will not get past at the altar, but you will get past them in an environment of good, solid, supportive connections with people who will encourage you, support you, pray with you, inspire you, and love you. That is where discipleship happens and the working out of your salvation as it's written in Scripture.